Rolling.
Okay. All right, guys, welcome back to After School. Today we have our lovely guest, Mr. Oakes. We are very happy to have you here.
Hello.
All right, so the point of this series, as you know, is to have our students get to know our charter teachers a little bit better. So let's start with the first question. What made you go into teaching political science and history and social science?
So I didn't initially think I wanted to go into teaching when I was younger. I actually thought I wanted to be a chef.
Oh.
And I thought that until I was partway through high school and actually started working in a kitchen. And I found out what a dysfunctional and unhealthy lifestyle that is for a lot of people that work in kitchens, and I decided I didn't want to do that.
Oh.
That also turned out to be the year that I had Mr. Thompson for U.S. history when I was a student here. And something about that class and like the way he ran things really just made me develop an interest in it that I didn't really have before.
Mm-hmm.
So as the year went on, I became kind of more and more obsessive about learning history, and I developed a really strong relationship with him as a teacher. You know, we had a really good dynamic in the classroom. He's very engaging, and it really inspired me. So that's part of why I decided that year that I was going to pursue a career in education. And when I was at the University of Delaware, I found out it was pretty easy to get a political science minor since I was in the history education program. So shout out to the UD history education people. They're great, a lot of great teachers over there. And so I picked up the poli-sci minor, and it turned out to be a really good thing because when I started here, I was teaching almost exclusively the freshman ISS class, which was very heavy on that stuff. So a lot of things just sort of fell into place for me. I feel very lucky, actually, in that way. And the other teachers that I had here, I had Mr. Stella for world history. I took AP environmental science with Mr. Rice, who's no longer here. I had AP economics with Mr. K, and I really just felt like there was a great sense of community among the teachers here. So when I found out that there was an opening, I applied for it immediately, and was really lucky to come work with the people who inspired me as a student. It's a pretty awesome opportunity.
Wow, that's really awesome. And also, can you talk to us more about your Native American heritage, and do you think that part kind of played into your decision to become a history teacher?
I do, actually. I think I was kind of pondering this over the last few days since you guys suggested doing the interview. So when I was probably 10 or 11. It was really the first time that I felt like a connection to that side of my family. Both my parents grew up in Oklahoma, and my mom's side of the family are members of the Ponca tribe, which is sort of in like northern central Oklahoma. That tribe's originally from Nebraska, and they were forcibly relocated. And I learned about all of this through my mother and through my other family members when I was at a pretty young age. So I had my Indian name ceremony when I was about 11. And that was the first time that I kind of got to know like that side of my culture, and I got to meet a lot of people who were very engaged in the tribal community. And one of the things that they really instilled in me during that ceremony and spending time with them was the value of service. And so it's this kind of sense of, helping out the larger community, and whether that's your cultural community or the community you live in or whatever else, it was just this palpable sense of value in that. And so my uncle Dwight Howe, who was doing the naming ceremony, gave me my name, and my uncle Dan Jones, who actually made a film about the relocation of the tribe from Nebraska to Oklahoma, helped me to kind of develop that sense of, I don't want to say obligation, but that sense of responsibility. And I don't know that that was super present in my mindset when I was kind of deciding to go into education, but the more that I've kind of spent time with that side of my family and thought about those experiences that I had as a young person, I think a lot of that has really shaped the way that I view education. And so as I got a little older and I spent more time, obviously we didn't go out there all that much because it's very far away. When I was 16, we went back, we went to the reservation actually, and I participated in a sweat lodge ceremony. And it was a really kind of spiritual experience in a way that I had never had before. And it made me feel like there's worthiness in dedicating yourself to something beyond just your own interests. So I think that kind of is a lot of what I bring into teaching, is kind of the sense of, you want to help cultivate a mentality that's healthy among young people, and you want to help teach them that same value of service and gratitude and charity, and just having a sense of connection to something beyond just your immediate experience. It's really easy, I think, these days, especially, to get sucked into like the day-to-day routines.
Oh yeah, for sure.
and to not feel connected to things beyond yourself.
Yeah.
So I think it was a really valuable experience for me as a young person, and I like to think that it's sort of a way of carrying on that legacy and teaching about the history of the native peoples of the United States and of other nations too. Gives me an opportunity to do that in a new way.
Wow, that's really cool. Going off of what you said about Native American culture and how from that you learned the value of charity and giving and doing something beyond yourself, do you think that ties into your decision to becoming a vegetarian?
I hadn't thought about that actually. Meat is very heavy in most tribal communities. It's a very intense part of the diet and the culture. The Plains tribes that I'm part of the community of was a nomadic tribe after the introduction of horses from the Spanish in the 1700s. And so it would be very difficult as living in a tribal community to be a vegetarian. So I don't necessarily think that it's a direct cultural connection, but certainly the idea of empathy and trying to live a mindful, live with an idea of how you're impacting others, right? Impacting the environment in particular. And that's really when I first started to learn about the environmental factors of meat consumption. That was when I was in college, and so I just turned 30. I've been vegetarian since I was 21.
Oh wow, 9 years.
The day of my 21st birthday was the last time I ate meat on purpose. I've eaten it by accident a few times since, but I guess the ecology aspect of it is in a way tied to that culture. I think it's also the idea of stewardship, which the Native community is very involved in. The idea of being kind of one with your environment and
sort of use all parts of the animal's body if you kill it and not waste it Americans do.
And it's a very, I think, it's a very important cultural practice in the sense that you don't see all of the aspects that lead to you eating something now, whereas in those communities, and there's still communities that do this now, where you're very intentional about how you use the resources that you have. And trying to be more of that mindset, I think, has been part of why I chose to stop eating meat. Just to have a greater awareness, because I always tell people when they ask me, how did you become vegetarian? Was it hard? Was it easy? I tell people if you already like what you're eating, don't learn about how it's made. Don't learn about the process, from how it goes from being a living animal to being on your table, because you'll more than likely be horrified.
Yeah.
And it will be harder for you to enjoy afterwards, which is kind of what happened to me. So the more I learned, the more it was I just don't want to contribute to this.
Yeah.
Environmentally, economically, and there's a racial justice issue to this too.
Oh, really?
Because if you look at where a lot of these factory farms, where you have the concentrated animal feeding operations are in the United States, they tend to overwhelmingly be near low-income areas.
Oh, wow.
So tribal communities are a good example of this, where you have the reservations that are established. Around that you have a lot of, not necessarily great land, but affordable land for mass manufacturers, mass farm operators to come in, and all of the byproducts of that makes its way into those nearby communities. So you have runoff from the waste when it rains, you have pollution from the methane and everything else that the animals are producing. And this is true in the South. My mom lives in North Carolina now, and she's seen this firsthand. A lot of the pig farming operations there are overwhelmingly near impoverished communities. And so these, people that live there have no say in this. They have no way to kind of, move somewhere else. And the people overwhelmingly who are buying those products don't see any of those impacts. So I think that is where you get, the ecological aspect, but also the justice, social justice aspect of it too. And I don't think that's really talked about very much.
Yeah, I didn't know about that before, but wow, that's really
It's kind of horrifying.
Yeah, that's terrifying to hear.
Yeah.
But, so since you have 9 years of being a vegetarian, and at Charter as a STEM school, we have a lot of people who are really into helping the environment and solving racial injustice. Do you have any tips on how to transition to becoming vegetarian?
Yeah, start small. I mean, the easiest thing to do is just to if you really want to go hardcore, you're probably not going to succeed the first time. I initially, when I started down this path, kind of was like, all right, I'm going to become a vegan. And that lasted for about 2 days because I realized that it's simple things that you don't think about. And this is why I say I've eaten meat by accident several times. There's animal products in almost everything that you buy at the grocery store. Unless you're paying very close attention, it's really easy to get stuff that you don't expect to have meat in. I've eaten vegetable soup that you read the label and you're like, oh, it had chicken broth, right? Or when I was initially thinking I was going to be vegan, I was eating a Nature Valley bar, those granola crumbly mess things. I read the label and it had honey in it. And so if you're like a hardcore vegan, you don't want to use any animal products at all, you're really like going to have to try super hard, and you're probably going to be frustrated by how much stuff you have to limit. So I guess, start gradually and think about, rather than having the mentality that you always have to have a big chunk of meat, which I think is a very American idea. Like that's kind of the basis of your diet.
Like the steak and potatoes.
Yeah, your meat and veg, right? Or you're gonna have your chicken breast and rice or whatever else you're eating.
Yeah.
Just think about how you could replace that with plant-based foods. And it's actually easier now probably to be vegetarian than any time in history because there's so many plant-based alternatives to things. Now, with a lot of those, you run into the same issues you have with animal products where they're heavily processed. They're not necessarily healthy for you. Just because it's plant-based doesn't necessarily mean it's good for you. But just try some stuff. Try some alternatives. Yesterday I bought a pack of plant-based pepperoni, which sounds weird and probably gross to the average person. And it might not taste exactly like pepperoni, but you can still find alternatives to have most of the things that you would typically enjoy in a very meat-heavy diet.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be all at once. You can do it like one day a week. There's a big kind of push now to get people to just make these smaller, more sustainable changes.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, you think about any dietary activity. If you start on like a hardcore diet because you're trying to lose weight or get healthier or whatever, you're probably not going to have as easy of a time maintaining that as if you just make smaller, gradual changes.
Yeah.
So, changing your mentality about what you eat, being more conscious of like where you're spending your time in the grocery store. I've shared this with my students a few times, but if you think about like the way a grocery store is laid out, they're usually laid out like a square, right? So around the outside of the grocery store is where all the healthy stuff is, and that's where you want to spend the most of your time. The stuff that's in the maze-like aisles in the middle is super processed for the most part. It's not generally very healthy, and that's where you're going to spend the most time if you're not careful because it's set up like a maze to get you to go up and down every single aisle. So if you just kind of work around the outside and think about what can I buy here and fill up your cart mostly with that kind of stuff, it'll be easier for you to just develop a better consciousness of what you're eating. Reading the ingredients is a really good thing to do if you're trying to avoid certain things. It's just a good practice for life, right? Like you want to know what you're eating, you want to know what you're putting into your body. We take a lot of other safety things very seriously, like everyone wears seatbelts. When you go skiing or snowboarding, you always wear your helmets, right? And these are things that people take for granted. I don't think a lot of people think as carefully about necessarily what they're actually ingesting.
Yeah.
So there's a kind of consciousness, it's a mentality that you sort of develop. But it's also like, it's not as hard as most people think to just make small changes. It can be if you're not in charge of where your food's coming from. Like for young people, I imagine your parents are probably doing most of your grocery shopping.
Yeah.
But that's a good way to start a conversation, and it's a good way to get other people to kind of see things from a different perspective, right? Because if you can kind of say, well, I'm trying to be more aware of how much of this I'm eating, you can help other people down that path too. But sometimes that can come off as preachy, and I think that's what turns a lot of people off of like veganism in particular, is that I think vegans have this sort of reputation for
like
being
the pushy stereotype. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's the wrong way to go about it, and you don't want to try to be like high and mighty or like make it sound like you're better than anyone else.
Oh yeah.
Because I think there can be a temptation, to do that, because especially like when you're in high school, because everyone's looking for like their thing, right? Everyone's like, what's unique to me, or like what's my thing. But what I've seen has been really cool with the Eco Alliance Club here. And shout out to Mrs. Messinger for organizing the Youth Environmental Summit that we went to before spring break. It's been a really good way for kids just to share these kind of things with one another, and also to get people in the school more generally to pay attention. So it can be, something you do on your own. You can find a like-minded group of people. The Sierra Club is a great, local community for like if you're ecologically minded. They have a lot of great resources for how to spend your time outside, or how to adapt your diet and other things to be more sustainable. And it can be very alienating too. And I tell my dad and my mom both do this, and even though I'm 30 years old now, every time I go out to eat with either of my parents, they say, "Are they gonna have something you can eat here?" And I'm like, guys, it's been 9 years. I haven't died of starvation yet. Every restaurant in the world has at least one thing that you can eat as a vegetarian or even a vegan. And I think there's starting to be a recognition that there's a big market for that. So, as I said, I think now is probably the easiest time, at least as long as I've been around. I don't know what it was like in the 80s or the 70s, but they've got a lot of really good anti-meat stuff or non-meat stuff. So yeah, that's a really long answer
Awesome.
to your question.
No, thank you. I really appreciated that. It was really insightful too because I never really realized like how grocery stores are like laid out and like all those little details that play into like what we eat.
They're businesses.
It's really interesting. Yeah.
They want to get as much of your money as possible.
I mean, yeah, unfortunately. So. Yeah. Well, okay. So going off of what you said about your teaching experience and your experience at Charter. So since you've been at Charter for so long, how do you think Charter has changed since the time you were in high school?
It's changed a lot. In some ways for the better, and in some ways I think, are just a kind of a sign of being in a school that is now, 70 years old building-wise. I think this place was built in the 50s. You guys know this, right? Like our facilities here aren't the best.
Yeah.
I would have liked to seen them change more between when I left here and when I came back. I would like to have seen them change sometime in the last 8 years that I've been here. So that's one thing, I think is an area for growth, we could say. Right? The school facilities could be a little nicer, the bathrooms, the temperature systems. I think one thing that I've really liked in the last couple of years in particular has been this kind of return to the idea of like a school, or a site-based school, right? So instead of having the obligation to do what every other district school does, or the obligation to do what every other school in the state does, I think one of the things that makes Charter so great is that we do things our own way. And that was why I liked being a student here. It's why I've liked teaching here for 8 years. We have autonomy, and that's a strength. And teachers have a lot of autonomy here, which I really value. Being able to kind of run my classroom the way I want without being micromanaged or having, any kind of anybody breathing down my neck, right? To say, are you meeting each of these standards at this timetable and this schedule? Yeah, they're all on the wall for a reason. I do teach them in class, but I'm going to do it in the way that I think is valuable. So I really do like that about working here, and I think, that's one of the reasons why we have such dedicated teachers, because we are allowed to pursue things that interest us, and we're allowed to teach things that we're passionate about. I think, in the coming years, it's going to be really important for our school to focus on community building, because the whole pandemic has really disrupted everybody's ability to socialize and to just have connections with one another. And we need alumni, we need leadership within the community, we need to be engaged, and the people that are sending their kids to our school need to be a part of this operation that we're running, right? And we need kids to buy into that, and we need kids to want to come back here and visit their teachers and after they leave, or even better, maybe donate money so that we can have functional facilities. So that community building thing I think is going to be a big priority as we kind of transition away from, knock on wood, I don't want to say the pandemic's over, but it certainly is a lot more normal than we were a year or two ago. And we can rally around that, right? We have a new opportunity in a lot of ways to say, all right, let's reset. Let's say these are going to be the things we focus on, and we can build a better school and a happier school if we do that.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I'm sure, COVID has affected all of us a lot, and I'm really glad that we could learn from it too.
Yeah. I mean, you hope that we learn, right? You hope that some good comes out of all of the horror and suffering and everything else.
Yeah.
I thought a lot about this last year when we were you were both in my class when we were taking A-Push from home, how horrible of an experience that was for everyone. And just the sense of isolation, right? And I remember how weird it was to be in here with one or two, or sometimes nobody else in the room, and just talking to a screen. All day for 3 class periods.
And the circles with the letters in them for our names.
So it was so depressing. So I'm really glad to, have the face-to-face and the interactions. And I think, that's been, the relationship building aspect has certainly become more of a priority for me as I've, spent more time teaching. When I first came here, I was really of the belief that, it had to be all about academic rigor and intensity and today we're going to do these 10 things, tomorrow we're going to do these 10 things. I've kind of moved away from that a bit over especially in the last couple of years, because really what you're here to do is to learn how to be a functional human being, right? And if you can leave Charter with a good social skill set, or you can leave Charter with a good network of people that you feel like you can trust and rely on, that to me is way more important than, any of this stuff. So focusing on the relationships, I think, is another thing that this school does exceptionally well. That's why I wanted to come back and work here. It's because I felt like people cared about me when I was a student, and that's a special thing.
Yeah.
So.
definitely. Yeah. So I think we have time for one more question. Let's end it with a fun, lighthearted one.
All right.
What was high school Mr. Oaks like?
You can ask most of the teachers that had me as a student here, and they'll all tell you the same thing. I was very quiet.
Oh, okay.
I was a pretty introverted young person. It's not because I felt like anybody was going to judge me or be mean to me or bully me or anything. I just kind of kept to myself. And as I got older, I kind of realized that that was not really a good way to set myself up for, a happy life. And so I went out of my way, especially when I was in college and when I first started here, to kind of try to, be more social, I guess. So high school Mr. Oaks probably would have come into class, and I can tell you I sat right there in this class when I was a freshman, when Mr. Moran was working here. And I probably didn't say 2 words to anybody except for the kid who sat directly behind me. And the only reason I said anything to him is because he kept kicking my desk.
Yeah.
So, as you go through high school and you think about what you want to take away from this experience, for those of you who are watching, I would say, this is probably the safest time in your life for you to, learn how to socialize. Because it may seem like everybody is here, to kind of, make themselves into the most competitive and intense and serious student. But really, at the end of the day, everybody wants to just feel like they're valued. And so if you can help out with that by, just cheering someone up or smiling at someone in the hallway, it's really simple things. I have seen a lot of that in the last year since we've been back in the building. I've seen a lot of kids, being more open to just putting themselves out there, which is great. But I think there's also, since we've been so isolated, a temptation to kind of retreat into yourself. High school Mr. Oaks would say, don't talk to anybody, just get through the day, go home, do your homework, go to work, whatever. 30-year-old Mr. Oaks would say, go out of your way to try to make as many friends as you can, try to talk to as many people as you can, learn from as many different people as you can. One of my favorite quotes is actually on the wall over there, is from Bill Nye. It says, everyone you will ever meet knows something that you don't. And that's what school's for.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you guys.
We really
this was fun.
Yeah, we really enjoyed learning more about you. And
I'm looking forward to watching some of the other teachers' videos.
Yeah, awesome. Well, until next time, stay safe and have fun.
Thanks, guys.